Welcome to Jay Levin's unique course on what women need to know about men. Jay begins the course by providing all of us an understanding of how modern male and female relationships developed. The benefit of this is that you don't have to think you're alone. Also, that you become aware that there are workable solutions to any challenges that arise. You'll also learn skills that will lead to a better outcome.
So hi, welcome to What Women Need to Know About Men course. It's a two-class course. So I'm going to start with a brief history of human development here, a history of male and female development. And then I'm going to explain to you a little bit about child development and what happens in a child and how you end up in the relationships you end up in, and what, therefore, is the dynamic that develops out of that needs to be healed and changed. And I work from a sense that we all have certain issues in life, and that a great experience in life is to make it an adventure to alter our inner relationship to these experiences and our outer ways of expressing ourselves. Rather than say, I've got to change, or I've got to heal this or that, you say, yeah, it'll be fun and an adventure to improve on what I've got going, as well as the experience of being in a place where I can have an enjoyable, safe, wonderful relationship. In looking closely at the development of male-female relationships, there's two areas we tend to look at and need to look at. One is the biological and the biological differences, and the other is our historical differences. So what do we know about the biological differences is that, first of all, on a very pragmatic level, men's dominant hormone is testosterone, and testosterone is an active, in the world, moving forward biological element. Women's natural hormone is oxytocin. And oxytocin might be called the relational. It brings you down. It makes you feel connected to things. It makes you want to be in the circle with people. So obviously, in human life, you need the active and you need that relational. And interestingly enough, most metaphysical systems identify a significant difference between male energy and female energy. For example, in Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, the masculine energy is the energy of knowingness. It's the energy of being in the world, knowing that this is this, and this is this, and this is this. The feminine energy is called understanding. It's understanding the relationship of the parts. So we can see the connection to testosterone and oxytocin. It doesn't mean that men don't have ability to relate and women don't have ability to know what the world is and to be active in the world. It means that there is an interesting fundamental biological difference. And in a healthy world, they're doing a dance together and creating a playing field of interactivity that's not marred by trauma and drama and stances. They can be in the same world, and they're meant to be in the same world together. So one of the biological differences is that women have more connectivity, more pathways between the left brain and the right brain, between their pragmatic selves and their deeper intuitive selves. So that also bolsters their sense of relationship, and it also usually makes them good organizers, people who can hold a community together in a certain kind of way. Men have fewer of these things, and as the great cultural anthropologist Michael Mead says, the difference between men and women is women have a 24-lane highway and men have a dirt path. So that's an exaggeration, but it's an exaggeration that has some real truth to it. And the way Michael is funny way exaggerates it is he says, you'll say something to a woman and she'll give you a response. And you'll say something to a guy and you get nothing. And 6 years later, he'll tap you on the shoulder and say, when you told me this 6 years ago, well, here's what I think about that. It takes us longer to process in general. Having said that, I want to make a statement that's true for everything I teach. Nothing is written in stone as universal. There's a sliding scale on all of this. There are women who are inhibited from relating for one or another reason. There are men who are phenomenal relators. It is not an easy thing. But these are general themes that tend to be more true than not. Biological is one of the elements that feeds into an entire historic process that's really important to know about for understanding human relationships, and then you can see how the biological reinforces these tendencies anyway.
Jay now discusses the history and relevance of human and child development.
So let's look at the history of human development. and history of the species. We've had two basic forms of human interactiveness or human community on the planet. One, which has been in the minority, is gatherings of equals in a circle. I go into considerable depth on this in the Life Mastery Basics tapes. But for our purposes here, what we need to understand is that the circle itself honors everybody for their innate wisdom, knowingness, their little piece of the pie and their elephant, and everybody's honored and respected. The other form of social relationship is hierarchical. And some of the texts I've read suggest that the hierarchical societies and cultures developed primarily out of areas where there was not enough low-hanging fruit, where foraging and competitiveness with other tribes came about, where there was necessity of a military culture evolving, where there was a better fighter who became the leader, then the strategy came in, and the men became followers, the certain kind of task in the military strategy. The leader became the chief evolved over time to the king became the sun god, and soon enough you had a society built from the top down where most of the wealth, most of the privileges, huge amount of the power was left at the fellow at the top, and he had life and death power. Sometimes there's a woman at the top. But the structure was hierarchical. And what happens to a person in a hierarchical structure is you have to suppress your true self. You're not allowed to be in your true nature. You have to be very careful and not to give offense. Huge amount of court intrigues happen. Endless rebellions happen. History is full of stories of endless rebellions, not just the big ones we've heard about, but when you drill down in history, it really is about rebellions, people fighting off hierarchies that they didn't want to be suppressed by, within their cultures, from other dominant foreign cultures, etc. So what happens to a human being and a male in those circumstances is that the male has to suppress himself in those cultures, be very careful. Craftiness becomes a virtue. The ability to be truly himself is repressed. And when you repress your true self, when you've got to play a role, the emotional basis for that is anger. You get angry. You've got to suppress yourself. That's a normal response to not being your true self. You get weak. You feel out of your own power. And to simplify, what happens is the fella comes home, and he's already in this role model. He's been born into this role model, and he wants it to have power, and he takes it out on the wife and the kids. He takes out the anger on them. And you have a long, long history of abusive family structures to which women and the children have to adopt, and at the same time, they're being patterned in. For the purposes here, what we need to focus on is that the male has already been wounded in a certain kind of way. And I'll come back to it in a moment, from the hierarchical structures. Some people say, well, it's biological. Men have more testosterone. You have your A-type apes. You have your dominant apes. It's just the nature of arising out of animal structures and out of animal societies and the nature of nature itself. But that's not really completely true. What's been noticed in animal studies is that in areas in which there was a lot of low-hanging fruit, there was a very different culture that developed, a much more matriarchal-oriented culture among animals. So it's not a given that, in fact, the predominance of male hierarchy is an inevitable form of biological necessity. Biology yields to culture in most and many instances. And when you come to the human being, we're talking about a species that's got an inner necessity to evolve past biology, to incorporate biology, but to evolve to a higher level than biology. To the degree that we're unsatisfied with our relationships and unsatisfied with what we're getting out of life, it comes from a deeper knowing that something is out of balance, that there's a harmony that's missing in the world. It's that probably that sense of a lack of harmony that's got you watching these DVDs or listening to these audios, because you sense there's a potential for it to be better, there's a potential for it to be different, as there really is, but it's not, and you don't have the tools. So this class is about tools, just like the Life Mastery Basics class is about tools. It's about understanding, and in this first class we're going to lay out much more depth of what the nature of the situation is. In the second class we're going to look at the solutions to it. So coming back to the male development process, the male comes out of this hierarchical structure and women adjust to it. And when a child comes into the world generations later, unless the child is lucky to be born into a society of that's already in circle and equal, the child is going to experience a hierarchical world and incorporate that inside themselves. The hierarchical world is based on judgment of other people. You go into a judgmental space. Other people's judgments become important. You want to avoid being judged. It takes a lot for you to learn to not be judgmental yourself. And judgment comes from the top down. It doesn't come from being in circle. When you're in circle, you're evaluating. So let's look briefly at the child development process. When a child comes into the world, that child has a true nature, true set of gifts that it wants to be nurtured to express, true way of being in the world that's healthy for it, a true way of just expressing and learning who it is and by doing this dance of self-expression in the world. And it comes into a world that's already hierarchical and judgmental, has negative energy fields, anger, violence around it. And on a sliding scale is experiencing some very intense level of that, a really abused child, or some moderate levels. But it's the nature of the culture. You think it's the way of the world. And so the child develops these coping mechanisms and fight or flight, I'll run away from this, I'll try to be a good kid, I'll try to get approval, I'll be the little fixer in the family, whatever it is. These behavior patterns become part of the child's sense of itself. And where they don't work, the child gets a sense of failure. He's trying to manipulate the world. The mind starts talking to the kid. He's already picking up judgmentality. He develops judgments on himself. Next big stage in this development process, the child says, I have to create myself as successful. He creates an idealized self, a picture of himself, what he's going to be, and that he wants the world to salute. We've all gone through this process. I'll be this, and I'll get what I need out of the world. And we're outward focused, looking at the world from that point of view. And what's in denial in that whole process is our true self, who we really are, what gifts we bring to the world, how we would be naturally in flowing service in the world, etc. So we lose a sense on the sliding scale. Some of us, we go back and forth between our real selves and these stances we create, these doubles we create. And we come into relationship and we meet the other person's double because the other person has it too. And so there's always four people in the relationship. There's your true self, trying to find a means of expression, and there's all the stance self and the reactive patterns and the not very effective coping mechanisms. And these four characters are doing some sort of dance and getting into blame and stuff like that. So when you enter a relationship, you're carrying all of history in this paradigm of top-down paradigm and the roles you learn in that top-down paradigm with you. That's a sort of broader outline. And before we get into the specific details of what you need to know about men and women in a relationship, let's take some questions.
You mentioned about low-hanging fruit and how that impacted the movement to hierarchical structure, or that it already existed in nature, and I wondered, did that become worsened when we shifted from hunter-gatherer to an agrarian society?
Most agrarian societies developed under hierarchical structures. I mean, the early ones were tribal and simple, but over time, with developments of the need to protect the land rather than just the tribe, it became necessary from foraging, it became necessary to have more military structures, more state structures. Tribes collectively got together, supported each other. Complex land arrangements and land ownership arrangements evolved. And fairly soon you had a natural matching or feeding into the hierarchical structures that were evolving. Now, when we go back to early tribal cultures, the earlier cultures that were very close to the land and very in spirit, like the Aborigines, in dream space with the God dream, the Australian Aborigines, they felt that God was dreaming the world and they were co-dreaming the world with God, and that everything they did was sacred and they could be guided to every place in the world. You didn't even think about creating hierarchy in quite the same way, hierarchy that wasn't in service to everybody else. But the distinctions between men and women in these cultures was very different. And one of the rules about hunter-gathering society, where it wasn't challenged and it was good, is that it didn't take a lot to get out there and find food. So a good deal of the time was spent in the village in play with each other. So when you're in play with each other, you're not quite in, I'm the boss, we're spending 10 hours today in your little cubicle, acting at, following my orders about where our company's got to go, et cetera. And it certainly wasn't the hierarchy of the military structures of ancient empires. So the historical process of change happened in many different ways. It happened by conquest. Europeans came and conquered America, destroyed the native cultures, imposed a different form. It's no accident the highly hierarchical cultures that came here was so divorced from a connected sense of humanity that when they first arrived on the islands, the writings of Columbus' crew revealed, they were met by tribes of people who were just so innocent and loving and brought them fruits and wanted to exchange them and thought them good people, and who had no understanding of the nature of who they were dealing with. So when the sick Westerners started, for fun, slicing off their arms, intimidating them, enslaving them, butchering them, they went into such mass reactiveness and sickness and illness that there was mass death over the first few years. Those who weren't being killed were dying from being dislocated from their sense of well-being in many ways. So cultures change from lots of different reasons. So we do know that the European guys came from the king down. So now I got some power in the world. Okay, I'll kill you with my power. Rather than, hey brother, just like the Indians saw them, you're my divine brother. Let's share the abundance of the world together. Let's share our play together. Let's share our lovingness together. Let's share our wisdom together. Let's share our sense of devotion to being connected to Mother Earth together and our dream space together. That was so alien to these guys. The people who wasn't alien, they got killed. There was another clash right in Europe even before we got here. Somewhere between 5 and 20 million women were killed during the Inquisition by this top-down culture that said, we want power over you, and anything that you do that comes from a different cultural matrix is a threat to us. Who got killed mostly? It was the women, the grandmothers, and matriarchs who were called witches, who said, I can't buy this top-down stuff from a male figure, and it denies me my own deep knowingness and my own nurturing, my own psychic and intuitive abilities, my own natural healing abilities. So one of the more interesting examples of circles, although we have a lot of them in modern life, we are learning and healing ourselves, and we're creating small circles of where we listen and hear others as equals. It was in early America when the Pilgrims arrived, and they found that the Iroquois had a very interesting, unique culture that was very wise in its handling of all the issues, the remnants of male hierarchy and the testosterone issues. And the founders based a lot of our democratic principles on what they learned from the Iroquois culture. But one of the things they didn't base it on was the fact that the Iroquois culture was actually a matriarchy in a certain kind of way. The people who got to really elect the chief, the active person who go out and actively be like the COO of the tribe, the chief operating officer of the tribe, were the grandmothers. It was the women who were wise and already coming from a place of equality among themselves and intuitive and connected to their deeper knowingness and not in any kind of stances in the world or just actually committed to the healthy relationship of everyone, the loving, healthy relationship, the connection of all. They were the ones who got to elect the chief, and he reported to them, or the COO, and he had to operate within a certain humane boundaries and without doing any of that. I'm the boss, I'm the king, it's all for me, I'm not here in service to the collective. We've had very few kings throughout history who've been completely in service to the collective.
Jay now discusses the core male wound and how it shows up in relationships.
So I find it best to help understand the process by understanding that there's a core male wound that developed out of this, and there's a core female wound and a behavior pattern that comes out of that. And those behavior patterns tend to do that dance with each other that doesn't work in relationships. So the core male wound I call the king wound. What is every male patterned into from that day when the hierarchy was so powerful? You're patterned into the idea that the hierarchical structure, and one guy is the king, and that king gets to be more his true self and more freely expressive than you get to be. And the deep desire of every human being is to be liberated, to be fully expressive, actually of our healthy selves, and I'll come back to this in a bit. So the model that gets inculcated into the mindset is king. So if I'm less than the king, I'm less than. Unless I'm very healthy and know my place, there's some part of me that thinks I'm subservient to king, not that I'm equal to. So I may be really angry at the king for who he is, but I'm angry because I'm feeling put down in a certain kind of way. And what I want to be is equal with the king, and that doesn't mean equal as equals, but equal with the king and as empowered as the king. So this king wound is so dominant and so reinforced by the hierarchical culture and the matrix we live in, because it's the wound of the authority self versus the wound of the equal self, where you haven't developed a whole set of coping mechanisms to deal with authority, and a whole set of coping mechanisms to deal with how you're not treated well in the world, or your little kid's toolbox of fight or flight that one learns as the ways to deal with the world until one becomes an adult and starts to unlearn these things. So the male wound is reinforced by everything in the culture you see that says hierarchy as we know it is okay, rather than hierarchy should be service and leadership. And it's so embedded that the winners are the guys at the top, the ones who make the most money, the ones who have the most power, etc. There's that lust for conquest. There's that lust that's inherent in the sense of king. But the real fact is that we can't all be kings with power over other beings, and it's not a healthy model. Simply not a healthy model, even though it's the one in which we're entrained and which is the matrix in which we live. Well, what's essentially going on for the male in this process, the dominant thing that he doesn't even begin to understand, is that the matrix that's come down to him through subtle behavior of other men, through subtle values in the culture, what manly virtues are, is that there's an element of, if I can be the king, and it's, like I said, it's often unconscious. But it plays out in the sense that the king wants himself to feel comfortable in every situation and believes he's supposed to be able to handle every situation and doesn't want to feel uncomfortable. We don't want to feel awkward. The king doesn't want to feel awkward. He wants to feel in control. The whole core masculine sensibility is supposed to be one of strength, one of presence, strength, ability to do things easily in the world. But undermining this is the sense that if I'm not king, if I'm not there, there's something fundamentally wrong with me. So what happens in that process is that the men you enter into relationships with, have very little life experience, unless they've had really good, healthy relationship with sisters and things like that. They have very real life experience in the give and take, in the flow of human relationships, whereas given our biology, we might even need more of that than women do, that give and take. We end up tending to have less of it. And the kind we have with our buddies is this sort of fun kind of competition and goofing with each other, etc. So what are the characteristics that men will show up with around women if in fact they're in this place? I want to make clear that when I'm talking about us guys, again, I'm talking on a sliding scale. Some of us have it in more details than others. Some of it have it less fully. But I think you'll recognize some elements of this in every guy you've ever been with, if you haven't been with a fully awake, enlightened man. So what are the characteristics? For one is they're very protected. They're very defended. We are very defended in our sense of selves. So what that means is that we want to win. So we get into a relationship, and first thing we want to win is the woman's body, often enough. So in this self-image thing that we've got, where we're not grounded in no self-image and just our beingness, where we're trying to be something in the world and make an impression and do well and express and not even have to think about what we're expressing ourselves, we're just being ourselves naturally. The whole idea of approaching a woman begins from the place of it's a conquest. And it's not just a sexual conquest, but achieving relationship has become something of a conquest. So the idealized self means when I enter a relationship, I really want to make sure I'm still in control. I'm on top. My priorities are being carefully taken care of. So what are the patterns of activity that we show when we're in that state of mind, this sort of subtle but really deep male wound of the kingdom? Well, for one thing, many of us guys are averse to criticism. You start correcting us, and we get very so, what are you just trying to correct me? Because criticism or anything that suggests change in behavior makes us wrong. We don't want to be wrong. We want to think of ourselves as empowered kings. And again, for most of us guys, this is not conscious. It's just we've inhaled, we've absorbed this from the culture. It's in our cellular level. It's literally in a cellular level because it's the matrix on which our neural net is running, all the pattern behavior of our lives. And again, for those who want to go deeper in this, I go more deeply into it in the Life Mastery Basics class, and the ones on child development in the first classes, and the classes on relationships. So we have an aversion to criticism, and the reason we have it is that deep-seated senses of criticism of ourselves might get validated. Well, I'm not good enough because I'm not the king, or I'm not good enough because I don't have this guy's charisma, or whatever it is that says I'm not good enough because we haven't been honored for who we really are in a circle by the culture and by the family life and by being given unconditional love and unconditional communications and unconditional explication of emotions. Because we're not in that place, we're scared about the place we're in. Most of us guys have some fairly deep and easily called for self-criticisms where we make ourselves wrong, where we're wondering how we look. I screwed up this way, I messed up this way, I'm a mess this way, that we've learned in childhood. And the idea that a woman who we're supposed to be the heroes to and the kings for and the idealized knights for in that top-down structure rather than we sit in circle with the women too because they've got their wisdom and we're all equals and we do the dance of equals. We're equals who are each unique. And even our differences play with each other rather than bounce off each other in the healthy culture. So we get this fear that you're going to validate my own inner sense. You'll turn on me. So we try to keep you at a distance. We have very sensitive to any criticism from you and often angry about it. And we try to control situations where we can't. We try to dominate a situation to avoid a criticism. We don't want to have those conversations because that's just women's stuff, and I might have to feel myself as wrong, and you're going to make me uncomfortable. I need to stay in the space that I'm comfortable in. So we've got this ego stance, and we're averse to criticism and don't like being corrected. You ever have that experience with any of the men you've been with? They want you to validate them, not find fault with them. They say, oh, you're finding fault with me, rather than just listen and say, okay. And they get easily sense of being diminished. So on a scale of 10, on average, what would you, 10 being the most sensitive, what would you say most of the men average out at?
7.
7, yeah. And if you had 7s and 8s, yeah. And have you met any 10s?
10 kings? Maybe my dad.
And the sense of sensitivity to criticism and needing to be right?
Yeah, definitely. There's maybe some that are higher. That's the average, so I'm sure
right.
if I could think of like a 9.
Uh-huh.
At least there's got to be 1 9 there.
Okay. So, and when you experience somebody like that,
Yes.
where does it take you? Where do you go to?
Defensiveness.
Right. Good. That's a pattern reaction, yeah, to that. Okay. So that's just one element of this, the kingdom space, where my behavior is not being examined. So in a way, we're transferring power over our sense of who ourselves to the women, which makes the women very scary to us. We get very scared that the woman is going to make us wrong or make us really wrong by abandoning us. And why are women bodies turned into property throughout history, turned into property, enforced by the violent power of the state or the tribe historically? It's because men didn't want to deal with women who would say to them, I need you to show up as my equal, not in your idealized self. Women didn't even have that languaging. They're just reactive to the behavior patterns. The best way to handle the fact that a woman might reject you in some way or find fault with you is to make sure you have absolute control over her. And that means not only your wives, but your daughters. So God forbid, and like still in the Muslim cultures, your wife should show some affection towards another man or interest in another man. Well, what's the penalty for that? You stone her to death. So part of the problem of being in the king self, this false self, is that it's a fantasy. It's easily struck down by any daily routines, and yet that's the inner matrix that controls the vision of where man's psyche, often unconscious psyche, thinks it's supposed to be. So we get easily diminished. We easily get jealous. We're going to lose that one thing that's supposed to be supporting us and saluting our beingness is really magnificent. And we have this great need to be seen as a hero and idolized in some way. We want to be the heroes. So we go into overprotection modes. We have a great fear of being seen as mediocre, and we particularly fear women who have any kind of sense of entitlement. Because if the woman has a sense of entitlement, that means maybe this relationship is not just about me. Maybe it's about the woman as well. So if you need this or you need that, many men, again, this is all a sliding scale, but the innate property of the kingdom is to feel uncomfortable with that. So men tend to fear women being emotional and their demands because there's some sense I'm not adequate to meet their demands. I don't even know how to relate to this person. And I'm going to have to see myself as inadequate. So either I make her wrong or I push her away. So underlying these qualities, of course, is a great fear of abandonment. So what happens when I think she's going to abandon me? I can get hysterical. Happened to be in my life. What is going on here? I'm losing that person I expect to validate me. So to try to control her, to get angry at her, or to try to put her on a pedestal and worship her, okay? So now I've just talked about jealousy, the need to be seen as a hero in a certain way, the fear of rejection, trying to control the woman, and the sense of fear of the woman to find them mediocre and not quite good enough and will look elsewhere, etc. So any of you had that experience with men?
Very few.
Very few. What patterns do you get coming to?
I generally pick guys that are not jealous at all, that are very calm, pretty set in their lives, generally are open to feedback. I think my pattern has been a lack of depth and a lack of intimacy.
Who tends to break up?
I do.
You do.
I do.
Because?
Because there's not enough intimacy to sustain my interest.
So what are the patterns the men show about lack of intimacy in those relationships?
In those relationships, the men have had a difficult time accepting responsibility when I've asked for greater learning or for more learning to be done with me or to take charge of creating more intimacy together so it doesn't just come from me. They've been reluctant, or maybe they've said, okay, if you set a time and you take charge, we'll do it. But they haven't wanted to take charge and move forward, and yet they've been so achy when I leave them.
Icky meaning weak.
I don't know if weak, but no, we don't want you to go.
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't come from themselves, the depth of understanding. I really need that to make this work and to really do it. From their point of view, they're just fine. No change necessary.
No change necessary. Okay. So what they're displaying is a fear of what you think is your sense of entitlement. You think you're entitled to more intimacy. You have a sense of what the relationship should be versus what their sense of the relationship should be. You have your own emotions and you have your own requests. And would you say they tend to see those requests and emotions as demands on them?
Probably, yeah. I think that they're annoyed.
They're annoyed, yeah.
I think that they're annoyed by my requests for greater intimacy and change. It has happened that they said, why don't you do it? You go study. If you want it, you go study. We don't want to change.
Right. You've managed to avoid being in relationship with, remember I said everything's on a sliding scale. We all have different characteristics. The kings have different kind of qualities. But there's a basic insecurity and sense of entitlement the king has underlying it. So if the insecurity and sense of entitlement isn't showing up as fear of criticism, it's showing up as fear of, I'm not going to change my patterns. I don't even know how to change my patterns because I'm not geared into it. So this must be me as okay because this is who I am as best as I understand it. So anything that asks me to stretch into an emotional range or a human range where the woman is something other than being there as my play toy, making me feel good about myself in some way because she's here. She's giving me sex, she's saying nice things about me, she's giving me company. But then when she wants something back that's a little bit of stretch for me, she may think she's entitled to that, but I'm here to receive and get. I'm not here to give that back. So kings are there to receive from you, to be honored, to be worshipped, to be given taxes, to be built massive palaces at great human expense, to the social welfare otherwise, etc. And the rare king is one who says, I'm really here to be in service to you. I'm really here just to be the COO of this the ship. So that's the model. So it's common for that. So anybody here experience jealousy and control?
I dated someone for a long time, actually, and I recall boiling water and being told how to boil water correctly. And I couldn't believe I was being told that I wasn't boiling water correctly, like for tea or something like that. That there was a certain temperature, a certain way to boil water. That was probably my best example.
So one of the characteristics of the inner king is, I'm right. I know how to do things. And when you're not in your true self, you want to be validated for everything in the world. So you get into that stance of, well, I know best. A father knows best. I know best. And therefore, if everybody says you know best, well, you feel good about yourself. Rather than saying, I'm here to learn. I'll share my learning. I want to learn from you as much as I want to share. And this is a dance of co-equals, in not only in relationship with you, in my personal relationship, but in the world with other people. The experience of life is I'm here to express who I really am, not this traumatized behavior, and to do a dance with your real self, because there's no greater experience in life than for us to be sharing and learning and growing together and not creating trauma for each other.
I've got one about jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
This is not really from a boyfriend, but this is from a guy friend who I've been trying to be just friends with. And when I went out with another guy who's a bit more than a friend, he found out about it. He was so upset. So upset.
Here's the male friend who's actually harboring a sense of, I really want her. It's about me. It's definitely about me and what I'm going to get. So in this vocabulary of traumatized self, any withdrawal from you from that pretty scenario and pretty picture of, I'll take it slow with her and it'll go well, and I'll just build friendship. Any withdrawal from that suggests not, oh, my great friend has got another great friend and she's going to be happy. She's got somebody she'd be happy with because I really care about her. It's like, I'm being threatened because I'm not going to be cared for as much. I'm not going to get that attention. This is core traumatized behavior. And what does he do? Instead of going to his place of, I'm realizing from this, I really care about you. And I have a sense that I'd like to go deeper with you in a relationship and see if you're open to it and explore it more. This, makes me aware that I'd like to, have that kind of interest from you now and share that with you and let himself be vulnerable. He goes to the emotional reaction, and he goes to, I'm jealous and rage, and how dare you? How dare you? Is that what you got from him?
It wasn't how dare you. There was such an upset.
So if it wasn't how dare you, it was, how could you be doing this?
Yes.
How could you be doing this?
Yes.
Here I am. And the reason he's in that place is because, completely innocently, as a child, he just adopted this picture of what he's supposed to be in the world and what's entitled to him in the world from the subtexts of the culture and the overt texts of the culture. And he doesn't have enough time in his true self to know his own power. So one of the components of the child development process, and it's true for men as for women, because we all develop the idealized self, is we don't really understand the price we pay for that self-abandonment. This is all innocent. This is a child's development process. The child is innocent. The child is just responding to a world, reacting to a world that it has not been given adult tools to deal with. And the core element that happens in the child development process as it picks up its fight or flight tools and then says, I got to be this and make myself this to please the world or get ahead in the world or whatever it is, if it's not coming from the child basics fundamentals of what the child came in with, none of us created ourselves. We all try to make up a fake self, a stand self, an idealized self. Some psychologists call it affective self, meaning it's an effect in the world. And we pay a profound price for that, men and women. The only difference between men and women in creating this is that the male wound it's really structured around this king ideal. And I'll come to what the female wound is in this class because it's important to understand how the female wound plays into the male wound. So once you're in this place innocently, you've created this being, then you're very, very sensitive to the rest of the world. There's insecurities in you because you're not in your beingness and just expressing yourself in the natural way a baby does as it learns and expresses without any pictures of I've got to adjust, I've got to make this person like me, etc. Baby doesn't come in with that. The baby's just being. And that gets stripped from the child by the pain and the energy and the dramas and the traumas of the culture and the judgments of the culture it experiences. And once you land in this place of insecurity, as we all do on a sliding scale, we're very vulnerable. And the thing to understand about men as we go through qualities of how men are behaving is we're only behaving this way not because we're evil at heart, we're phenomenally good-hearted at heart. We're phenomenally loving at heart. But it's very hard for women to understand, because of our behavior patterns, that we're also phenomenally sensitive at heart, just like all human beings are, all children are. We are sensitive in the best sense. We are exquisite instruments of reading patterns and sensing energies with exquisite access to a deep knowingness. And when the culture we're born into slams that away from us, strips that away from us, fills us through with these coping mechanisms, things like this, and we think that's us, we are alienated from ourselves in such a painful way and such a scary way that it's easy for our fear to come forward and us trying to use a fight or flight tool. You know, I'll try to control, that's a fight tool. I'll get angry, it's a fight tool. A flight tool, I'll run away, I'll pull back, I'll withdraw. I won't communicate with her, I'll take a stance, or I'll just be out of the relationship altogether. Those are fight or flight tools. Women have the same tools, and you do the same kind of patternings often, but you do it with a certain different way and a certain different methodology because of your core wounds and also because of your natural relating disabilities. So we'll come back to that. But the guy who you're reacting with, who we're going to be talking about now, and what the patterns you're reacting, keep in mind as we go through these patterns that we're really dealing with somebody who's really wants to be loving, can really be the most phenomenally loving, caring, nurturing being, but hasn't been patterned into it. And a person who can have enormous access to wisdom and a great potential for remaking the world in a healthy way and in a deeply knowing way, because part of the male mind is the ability to conceptualize and understand that which is, whereas the female tendency is more to understand the relationship of what is and conceptualize that. So we bring phenomenal qualities of heart, body, mind, and spirit, and we have real gold in every man. And the question is how to create a safety zone to access it. And we're going to get into a lot of that in the second class. So as we go through these qualities of where men are coming from, keep in mind that we're all coming from a victim-perpetrator, highly judgmental culture. We're all traumatized from it. We're all really innocent. Even though we feel victims of what you might feel is what the guy has done and his craziness and how come guys can't show up. The context becomes how do you show up more and how do you create a safety zone that's different so that the men can show up more as you're part of it and call the men into place that they can feel more comfortable in and more empowered in. So again, that's a lot of the second class. So okay, let's look now at these behavior patterns of men that we know from the traumatized male meeting the traumatized female with, again, the core form around which all that trauma is unconsciously built, with even the guy not knowing it, is that king image that comes from the hierarchy. So if you're not the king, you're something less than the king, somehow you're innately not enough. So there's that push unconsciously to somehow have to be saluted as a king. And certainly when you get into intimate relationships where every bit of your shadow stuff and every bit of the other person's stuff comes up and all your stance mechanisms, you know, it's the beauty of relationships. You can't hide anything ultimately. You try to hide, but what you're hiding is so obvious to the other person. And you think you're hiding something, but you're just hiding. What's going to be seen is that you're hiding. So, you know, we're talking about these classes leading to greater understanding of the next level of what do I need to learn about relationships.
Jay now talks about the male fear of abandonment, the need to be mothered, the fear of being trapped, and other issues.
So, fear of abandonment. I know this one really well because until I healed it, it was a huge issue for me. So, us guys often have a great fear of abandonment. And we handle that in two ways. One way of handling it is we don't even let ourselves get close. We really keep an emotional distance. We don't show vulnerability. We keep a very stern way of how we are relating to the person. And we keep very strong boundaries. And we'll have our sex and get out of there fast is one of our patterns. And part is because we don't know how to relate. We haven't been taught how to relate. It's a skill set. The culture has unfortunately now taught the skills. I recommend the book Conscious Loving by Gay and Catherine Hendricks about those skills, and Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. We need to develop adult skills, and in the absence of them, what happens is these behavior patterns from our inner fear, which is a fear of obliteration, that I'm not going to be enough, and our idealized self that we created, and our critical mind that we create that we're trying to escape from as well. What happens is you get into a place where either you stay away or you get into it and the woman starts to move away from you and you go hysterical. You go hysterical. You obsess on her. You grab at her in every way. You put her on a pedestal and try to prove to her you're worthy by idealizing her. Some guys do that as their mechanisms. And that's also linked to a sense of the woman as the power figure and the nurturer. You're there basically to take care of me in a certain way. And if you abandon me, it's like my mother was abandoned me. So fairly often, us guys will show a need to be mothered, make me feel good, soothe me, comfort me, right? Take care of me, mother me in a certain kind of way. If I'm saying I'm a screw up in the world, well, you tell me I'm wrong and make me feel good about myself, or whatever it is that the guy shows is that kind of behavior. And underlying that is a fear that I'm not enough, and I'm not good enough, and I really need the support. And if I lose the support, you're idolizing me. If I lose your sexual attention on top of it all, then I'm on my own, left with my diminished, even worse self-image of what's wrong with me, and maybe I'm not enough, and I can't stand that. So I will fight endlessly and push in every way I can to get you back into the mold I believe you should be in, which is making me your hero, loving me, making me right in all circumstances, etc. Again, I can't say this enough. This is all on a sliding scale with different guys in different ways. And I'm using deliberate exaggeration to make a point that this shows up so much in the culture that it's got to be recognized and dealt with for what it is. Anybody in the class have experience with men that they can relate to in that way?
I had one boyfriend that, I can't remember what we were supposed to do that night, but I think I was supposed to go over there, he's supposed to meet me, and he just never showed up, just completely disappeared. And then I hadn't heard from him, and a friend drove me over to his place, and he was there as if nothing ever happened, and he had nothing to say, and that was the end of our relationship that night. We're good friends now, we spoke about it later, but it was definitely an abandonment issue with his family, and anyway.
So I understand this. He had abandonment issues, so he didn't show up?
I mean, I think this was his abandonment coming out. You know, just he doesn't have a good family relationship with his family, either parent.
Right.
Either parent.
So this was an avoidance issue. In other words, because of, what you're saying is because of his abandonment issues, he just said, I'm going to avoid this. I'm not even going to I can't go deeper here because I could get hurt.
Yeah, it's almost like he just completely blanked out at that moment, that we even had plans or even had a relationship. It was like complete amnesia or something at that point.
Good. So one of the universal truths is about how we handle intimacy is that, the universal meaning for men and women, is that the neural net and the machine that has taken all our experiences in and all our habits and all our traits and keeps running those things over and over and becomes reactive behavior, knows that each of us had an experience in childhood where we really got slammed, where we really got hurt. Because coming into this world from a connected world, you're going to get slammed at some point and be pulled out of your ability just to be nurtured, be safe, and completely fully express. So that inner psyche wants to protect us from intimacy that recalls that early state. Because the expectation is, if I open up here and I get close to another human being, then I'm going to get hurt again. Of course, the guys layer on this whole sense of my own sense of power and kingdom. I get smash. But beyond that reality, there's the deeper reality is that men and women both have this. It's just universal because we really don't underestimate how hard it was for us to find ourselves in this world and the emotional, psychological reactions we had to being in this particular judgmental, difficult, often non-supportive world. However much our parents loved us, we're still in the world. It's got lots of energy of one person being better than another, criticism, damage, trauma. And when we come into a relationship, we're coming into a place where we're vulnerable again to being open and having to deal with another person, and we're terrified. So we pull back, or we find ways to destroy the relationship before we even get into it. So that's not an uncommon pattern. Or once we're into it, we sabotage as we go along to keep the person somewhat at a distance. And we keep going through cycles of connectiveness and drama, connectiveness, drama, connectiveness, drama, and not understanding the cycles. As I said, we go more deeply into those patterns in the Life Mastery Basics course and the relationship classes there. So good, thank you.
I had another boyfriend who, he had a pattern of constantly showing up late. This was his pattern, that would be like a half an hour late, regularly just late and just kind of not show up. And that was his pattern. And then I got to be his mother. I got to be his scolding mother, which I hated being. And eventually, that was sort of the end of our relationship, was over that pattern. But when he was growing up, basically, he lost his mother when he was about 8. Not that she physically passed, but she just wasn't in his life from the age of about 8. And also his father wasn't really present, so he had to actually get himself out of bed to go to school. And he actually wished that there was someone who was a disciplinarian in his life, and that became me. I became his disciplinarian, so he would definitely, deliberately kind of, I think, show up late so that I could be, demanding of him, like, why aren't you on time, and be the mother that he never had. And it was very tiring.
Right, okay. So in the traumatized self pattern, we go out feeling victimized in the world, feeling like, okay, I got to make this world work for me now that I got to truly express myself, and I'm on the defense and watching everything and watching other people's moves and protecting myself. So that's the larger pattern that everybody goes through on a sliding scale that's at play here. And so what we tend to do is we tend to use people, think of the other people as people who would be used in our drama. You're a subject of having to fix me in a certain way or relate to me in a certain way so I feel better. Rather than healthy relationship is what's our mutual caring, what can we do for each other? I really care about you, I sense you really care about me. Let's do that dance of mutual caring for each other. It's like most of us tend to enter a relationship as what am I going to get out of it? Including those who entered it from the codependency. What can I get out of it by taking care of it? I'll have my role being the caregiver, I'll take care of everything like I did as a child, or so I feel I got a role in the world rather than my true role, right? So we go through this dance of stances in a way. He shows up with this stance of wanting you to be this person, but he's got his particular person in mind. Every king needs a supportive mother. The queen mother is supposed to be really wonderful and really great and take care of, make sure the king sits on his crown in a very healthy way, and so he can bring her all this stuff. She'll say, the best way to sit on your crown is this way and that way. And that's an interesting reason why through so much of the historical dramas and the craziness of courts and the power structures, queen mothers have played such interesting roles in that drama of propping up the king in his insensitivity.
Jane now reviews the wounded male fight and flight patterns.
So another of the male patterns, it's a smorgasbord of patterns we fall into, but these tend to be the ones that we get to notice a lot, is this fear of men of being trapped, the sense of, I can't commit, I don't want to feel trapped here, which is more a male-dominant issue, though lots of women have it. And again, it's a matter of being a sense that I don't know how to be in relationship. I don't want to feel inadequate. I don't want my king sense of self to erode because I'm going to enter something where I'm not in control. I've got to be in an unfamiliar turf where I might be uncomfortable and I might get hit again as I did as a child. So we men tend to get out of there very quickly especially after sex, once we've had the conquest, that sense of, okay, look at my sexual king just had a field day, and now my emotional king is supposed to show up, and I don't even know who he is. So that's another thing. And that sense of not wanting to seem one down to the women or lose control comes up in career issues, where fortunately the culture is changing. Obviously we're growing. Women are getting higher positions in the culture, being honored for it, finding men who are comfortable with it. But in many cases, and I've had quite a number of clients like this, my private life mastery training teachings, the fear of the woman being the bread keeper, being the one doing the job well, and I'm not acting out my male king role of being the provider, being the top dog, etc. And this is a very important thing for a lot of men, and it's a really, really almost a breaking point for a lot of men for whom that view of themselves will ally with our inner sense of not being enough and the criticism we have ourselves where we're not good enough. And yet we see the woman succeeding and we're supposed to be succeeding. This is a very traumatic issue that's played through the culture in very, very dramatic ways, including attempts personally by men to say to their wives, no, I don't want you doing that. You stay here and you do this, I'll take care, Certainly that happens even more on a class basis, social class basis. And it also has played out in the culture where dominant male organizations have been often very slow to promote women, to make them equals, to give them good jobs, because there's a sense collectively as women are not fully empowered, equal beings. And since that's true, I can get to exploit them a little more. So we've had 50 years of wage struggles around women in the workplace and the glass ceiling issues and things like that. So those things are being healed in the culture piece by piece. Women have lost important court cases to conservative Supreme Courts that tend to come from the old paradigm without even knowing they're coming from the old paradigm of hierarchy and kingships, etc. If you got your higher place in society, you deserve it, rather than a place of what do we need to be in equals to nurture each other. And a final issue that men show that I want to deal with is boredom. We get bored. I can't do it. I get easily bored. I'll just go hang out with the guys or sit in front of the TV set. Boredom is a form of escape. It's a way of saying, I'm not going to open up to the learning experience here because it might be too threatening to me emotionally. This might be the most phenomenal learning experience of my life. And in fact, learning healthy human relationships and how to work them without going judgment with you, as the books I've recommended teach, and that whole experience is one of the most phenomenally wonderful experiences you can have in your life, learning these skills. But in the absence of knowing that, boredom often sets in because the man doesn't know quite how to be free enough to relate from his true spirit to the woman's true spirit and do that dance of true spirit. So we withdraw into a sense of boredom. Guys say, I'm bored of this, I'm bored of that. So it's just fight or flight. It's an avoidance pattern. So anybody have experience of men who fear being trapped or career issues or boredom issues that you'd want to share with your men?
I had a question. I have a friend, and she's actually the breadwinner in their relationship, and it's actually a marriage. And I think it's sort of the reverse situation where she wants him to step up, but he's very comfortable not being the breadwinner. And I wonder, that seems to be maybe more of a paradigm that will come in now because women are much more empowered and they're more independent financially. So I wonder what you have to say about that pattern.
One of the things about the post-women's liberation ages is that roles are becoming confusing. Emotional situations are becoming confusing. So here's a different form of king, comfortable in being taken care of, in a way mothered financially, very happy with her as a breadwinner. And if they don't have a contract, that's great, because what he's really doing with his time is being his true self. And whatever that true self is, maybe he's meant to be in great pro bono service in the world to others as the expression of his dream life. Or maybe he's meant to be an artist and it'll take some time to raise some money. So in the absence of that kind of conscious awareness, post-paradigm shift, awakened relationship, which they apparently don't have, I don't know what he's doing. Is he doing that, or is he just goofing off?
No, I think he's working, but I think he's also comfortable not being like top dog.
Okay. And he's comfortable with the work he's doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Too comfortable for her, perhaps.
All right.
But
So she's taken on the vision of we've got to maintain a certain kind of lifestyle, and she'll pay the price for taking on that lifestyle. So they don't have a clear contract, a spoken contract, that they're both in agreement with, that supports his idea of what's comfortable and lets her to adjust her idea of what's comfortable. What I'm hearing here is she's taken on sort of the burdensome king role. I'll take care of it, I'm in charge here, which is actually not a burdensome king role. It's actually the role of women in service, the sense of women need to be in service and then resent it. And I'll get to that core female wound in a moment. But she's created a vision of what her lifestyle should be that may very well be coming from her idealized self. Because if she wanted to work less, and she really was in healthy relationship with him, in clear communication with him, she would want him to be exactly where he is if he is in fact in a place where he's growing, is comfortable, and is willing to accept a lifestyle in accordance with that. So they just may be living beyond their means because she's driving herself to a place she shouldn't be. Her idealized self may have a vision of so she's got to live a certain lifestyle, certain level of luxury, rather than say, what is my vision for myself in this life where I'm really content with the work I'm doing, not driving myself into work, but more like him. I'm content with the work I'm doing, and what's the lifestyle? And if I'm content with the work I'm doing and my role in the world, I'm not thinking the achievement is the material place we've been able to reach. I might be very content with something simpler, less expensive, not spending the money where we do, where the combination of my salary and his salary are completely adequate. So again, we go over this in detail in the relationship classes, the basic course. And for the purposes here, she's got an obligation, if she's unhappy, to look at her role and take responsibility for what her patterns are, taking her into this place and where she is in judgment rather than seeking agreements. Okay? So what is the core female wound that tends to play into this? The core female wound is the sense that in a kingdom that can often be brutal, my job is to be somewhat in service to and yet carefully massaging of that more brutal power. So the core wound becomes, I've got to take care of. I've got to take care of. That's the core wound for women. I got to find out my survival. I've got to take care of. So in the self-abandonment that comes from that, what happens? The woman often has to suppress her own feelings. And like any human beings who has to suppress their feelings and get along, it's going to explode in some kind of way. How does it explode? Well, it explodes with the classic case of the catty woman, the woman who's saying something nasty on the side because she's not feeling empowered. She's really not nurturing herself. Her role is to take care of the guy's dysfunctionality and keep him just functional enough not to blow up historically, and that gets passed down from mother to father, to mother to daughter, etc. Her role is to deny herself for the sake of other people, protect the children, unless she's so damaged that she lashes out at the children, as many women do, and tries to control the children, and feel a victim of having to take care of the children in the way she has to take care of. I've seen that a lot in people I've worked with. So the female wound then becomes, I'm less than in a certain kind of way, and I can find some sense of my value by being in service to you rather than just to me. And of course, one's nurturing abilities feed into that, except it becomes excessive, but there's an energy feeding into that that's natural and healthy. And having to deal with this power situation to protect herself, women often become very manipulative, so we get women that get the vision of being manipulative, and they have been, because manipulative means I can't face power equally. Can't stand up to power and say, your behavior is unacceptable, get out of here, leave me. When you're the property of another man and your whole existence depends on the culture of getting approval from the guys who have the power over the dollar, has happened throughout human history, to most of Western human history. It was not tribal until the modern era, and we still have plenty of remnants of that in the modern era. Your need is to figure out, always be on guard, always be thinking about who I am in relationship to my financial needs, my very survival needs, rather than what I can express. And how do I do the dance with this person's power over me? And so I've got to be crafty, and I've got to be clear, So the crafty woman looking for her own power becomes one of the archetypes. When men express themselves, they're just being what men should do, express themselves. When women express their anger, they're being bitches and cunts. Men are afraid of women anyway because they don't know how to relate to them. But when men meet up with that archetype or the elements of that archetype in women, they feel a great deal of fear of women. And I can tell you that from conversations with a lot of men, how much men try to objectify women, put her out there. Surprising number of places that men go to victimizing themselves about the woman. She's a this and she's a cunt this way. And I don't trust women without recognizing the true power they're giving away as they make themselves victims of the women and cautious and fearful of these women and feeling women don't get you and they're not trustworthy in the deepest sense. So these dances, these larger archetype dances that each of us have elements of show up in relationships. So it's incumbent upon women as well as men to take a look at their core wounds and their core behavior patterns. And again, it's not universal. Some women handle this by becoming very controlling themselves. Where they have power over the children, they'll accept that. If they feel that the husband is really weak in the sense that he's an avoider, he's got from being lower down in the pecking order, he doesn't feel his own self-worth. There's a pattern in which women will try to be the dominant creature in the family, the controller, even as she thinks that, well, my core role is to take care of it. The subservient, dominant, fixer mode that tends to be the core female woman. So anybody here recognize that in themselves?
Yeah, I do. But I think it's universal. Just as women, that we all have this, I don't know now if it's a program or if natural, but for me, for myself, I know that I do have this taking care of things, people, and I think it's a female thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even related with hormones. And I think that it can spill over to territories that are not healthy, where we can neglect ourselves, or where I have perhaps neglected myself to some degree.
So you're right. What's organically natural for women, from the oxytocin to the nature of their relational skills, is to be nurturing. So we all have natural abilities. Trauma introduced into a natural ability means that you take it to excessive degrees. Your sense of self becomes reliant on it. You're not just being and nurturing, sort of having that natural flow. You can move into, I've got to fix this, I've got to control it, I've got to make sure it works out okay. You go into anxiety about it, right? Not just a healthy, organic expression of givingness. You become caretakers rather than caregivers. And the reason is because there's some sense of your idealized self that wants to be recognized. He thinks you've got to do this, and this will be my role, and maybe if I do this role, I'll get the recognition I need. Of course, it doesn't happen, so you keep pushing at it more, think I'll do it harder, rather than being the state of true self and knowing self, which says, I give for myself naturally to the degree that I feel is right. I don't caretake. I don't put people in the codependent situations. I don't make people dependent on me. I just give naturally from my true self. And I don't rely on people's feedback, the sense of myself that, look how important I am, or at least I've got a role here. Otherwise, I'd be nothing. So that's where the trauma comes in from the culture. So, and whatever our natural talent gifts are in any area, we all have the tendency to take it to its toxic extreme because we're trying to use that natural gift to get ourselves the approval we didn't get as a child, or the connectiveness we feel we lost as a child, even if that connectiveness is dysfunctional. So you get abused women staying in family structures, taking the abuse, because they think, I can't leave, this is my role, I'll just have to take it, right? That's on the extreme levels. Okay, to close the class, I just want to do a review of the patterns, and you can note which ones come into your life. And then we'll do a little exercise and we'll close the class. So the wounded male pattern, there's a wounded male fight pattern, and there's a wounded male flight pattern. So fight or flight. So the wounded male in his fight pattern, what does he do? The male whose tendency is to go to a fight pattern. He tries to control and dominate. He tries to be right. He tries to manipulate. He tries to win. He goes into blame a lot. He blames you. He blames you. You say something to him and say, well, what about you? I remember when you did this and this and this. And what do you mean, Kristen and me? You just did the same thing. He goes into blame. When he feels weak, his way of fighting is to put you on a pedestal. We do this. Us guys will do that. We have a narrow sense of justice, so we're easily slighted. We're easily offended. Us guys who are in this wounded male fight pattern, we're ready to strike back quickly. And we tend towards very deliberate emotional abandonment. I'm not comfortable here. I'm out of here for you. Whether I'm fighting you by just shutting down, sitting around quietly, watching my games, not talking to you, or I'm literally physically out of here. That's it. I've had it. Right? He's fighting back. He seems to be flight, but he's fighting back. He's abandoning you emotionally by doing this. And the wounded male flight pattern is he gets very defensive, goes into avoidance. He's very afraid of being forthright, sort of wiggles around issues, especially emotional issues. In dating situations, if you show interest in him, he gets disinterested because he's taken out of the king model, so he'll pull back. He often spends his time thinking with this sense that there's somebody better out there for me. Maybe I really don't belong here because he's already not fully there and he wants to escape. So the next one will come along and that might be even better. The next one being this belief he'll never have to deal with any of the realities of another human being and just can stay in that 5-minute bubble of, aren't you great, let's have sex. He goes into a lot of short-term escapes like TV. He goes into a quick sense of try to repress something in you and then withdraw himself. And he'll very frequently go into post-sexual conquest withdrawal because, again, he doesn't know how to show up. Those are the patterns that tend to dominate non-functional relationships. Now, of course, there's a lot of relationships in the world that are getting healthier and healthier. People are learning their ways through this stuff. Not every relationship is healthy, but I'm assuming that women who are participating in the class or watching these tapes are trying to puzzle out a situation that's not working for them and need a deeper understanding and then the tools to deal with it. So in the next class, we're going to deal with more of the tools, and we're also going to deal with taking it to another level of understanding the patterns because it's very important. And I want to close with a reminder that this game we play, this game of dance and stance, etc., as much as it hurts us emotionally, we take it personally, and it makes us absolutely crazy for the men and the women. It really makes us crazy because we're coming at relationship in an unhealthy way, which is usually through sexuality and wanting to get our ego needs met rather than developing deep friendships first and allyships first, stuff that's talked about in conscious loving. And you working with these tools. In the absence of these tools, we feel more of a victim of this. But before we use the tools, really deep understanding, patterns that we're talking about here really are the patterns of a cultural pattern that we're innocent of. We have the responsibility for healing those patterns inside ourselves and to creating the space for us guys to heal the patterns inside ourselves, holding that space, which is very important if you're ahead of the guys. And many women are, of course, they've been liberated earlier. And many women are ahead of guys, and I'm going to go into the reason for that in the next class. But I want you to take away the reminder that what you're looking at in the behavior of men, just as when you look at your own behavior, is one that is changeable, is healable, and two, the being who this behavior is obscuring is really something magnificent under that. Us guys are phenomenal beings when we let go of our trauma. Underneath it, we have levels of deep caringness that are so obscured by this patterning. But when free of them, we can be, the idea of the man as the rock is true. Men can be rocks once they've healed their trauma pattern because we have this deep lovingness that the next class will hopefully help us open to. So, question.
When you spoke about women as caretakers, is the martyr syndrome the same thing?
Absolutely. It's right there in the pocket, right? Look at all I give, and this is my role, and maybe someday they'll acknowledge me for my role. It's the deprivation of being that child who didn't get nurtured and seen enough and encouraged enough, and is out there trying to get the world to give it the approval she didn't get in childhood that will allow her to feel safe inside herself and just be.
And the other question I had is, what is the underlying pattern between a man who is more prone to, say, the abandonment pattern versus one who's going to put the woman on the pedestal? What's the underlying difference between those two behaviorally?
You mean between the fight or flight males?
Well, I mean, not all men are going to put the woman on the pedestal, so what's underlying those that do that as a pattern?
It's usually the abandonment issue. I mean, if I'm a male and I'm in my comfort zone, even if I'm unhappy, and you come along and threaten that comfort zone, some of us are going to be out the door really fast because we don't want to experience the sense of failure of self that might happen here. So we find lots of ways to think of you as, she's not enough, I can do better, and I'm not that interested. Once our sexual satisfaction is handled, it's often a pullback. But once a man has entered a sense of relationship and starts becoming dependent on the woman for emotional support, for telling him he's a cool guy, for acknowledging him, and so he's entered that zone, then the fear of losing that means the fear of losing the approving mommy in some cases. Therefore, he gets hysterical, and in that hysterical, he say, oh, she's the greatest, she's just the best, I can't, who am I going to be without her? She's the most fabulous person in the world. There's never been someone like her. So he goes to the sense of moving her up in the hierarchy, mental hierarchy, in the sense that, in the belief that, of course, it's a very deeply unconscious belief that if he gives her enough glory, she'll get attached to the glory. And besides, he doesn't know any way to express himself to her. He's not ready to say to her, I'm just in terror of you leaving me. It's a codependent pattern, yeah. And it's like, if I'm being worshipped, I'm not going to leave my subjects who are worshiping me, so maybe she won't leave hers. Again, this is not conscious. This is all happening on an unconscious level.
The other question I had is the wounding patterns. I'm wondering, does it really depend also on who was your primary caretaker? Because I know men who definitely have more of the caretaker pattern in themselves, more of the female wounded pattern than the king pattern. So if they have more issues, say, with their mother, historically, that they may exhibit more of the female wounding pattern?
First of all, there are men who are naturally healers and caregivers. That's their framing in life. That's what they brought in with them. That's the core of their sensibility that they didn't make. So if there hasn't been a healthy layer of abuse laid on them in their childhood that completely scares them out of that, you're a sissy or something like that, and makes them macho up in a phony way, if in fact that quality is allowed, then that might be a natural tendency of them, because the king pattern is not natural. King pattern, the domination over another being, is not, and the higher order of species development, that's not organic in the sense of being in your true self. That comes from being perverted into the hierarchy. So I don't know the person's childhood patterning, but it could be that the family was dysfunctional in its own way. You went into this caretaking mode for the family, as many kids do. Right, I'll try to fix it. I'm a caregiver, and the minute you try to take your caregiving into fixing it rather than knowing how to use it wisely from the true self and honor the other person, you're really taking care of the other person, then you'd be programmed into that pattern and fixing the family disruption. So that may well have been his pattern. So he's only secondarily a victim of the whole king structure, because the king structure is what's the implicit nature of the disruption for his parents that caused whatever tension and trauma they had that he was trying to cope with. Okay, cool. Okay, see you next class.
This concludes Class 1 of Jay Levin's 2-class course on what women need to know about men. For the second class, you can download or order the CD from this website. If you are interested in an appointment with Jay, you can email him at jlevincoaching@gmail.com or contact him directly at jlevin.com. The following are testimonials from students who completed Jay Levin's course on Life Mastery Basics.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm a cameraman, and I am sitting here in front of you because on my first day coming in to film Jay, I was very surprised to be a part of what was happening. I was not expecting the shoot that I had walked in on, And after filming Jay for a day, I realized that what he was talking about had been something that I had maybe been searching for a long time, and was very surprised and felt very excited that what I had walked in on and became a part of was something that I would offer up to my family and friends and even my peers. I'm 28 years old, and the first thought that came to my mind was how my buddies could use this skill set to improve and better their own lives. So as I was thinking, standing behind the camera, I spoke up to Jay and felt, I was so excited about what he was talking about that he decided to put me in front to give a small testimonial, because I really felt it was necessary to let the audience know how important and groundbreaking these life skills are. Just sit back for a moment and think about your own life and your relationships. And I think what Jay is touching upon is very much the essence of community and family and friendship, and I would highly recommend it to anyone.
One of the things about this course is that it's called Basics of Life Mastery. And I think one of the things that course provides is giving practical tools that can be applied in real life situations so that we can move out of sort of the stance self, move out of the traumatized self, and really make deliberate progress and concrete progress. So I think the tools are one of the most important things, that we're actually learning skills, sets to work with another human being, to actually live and come from a very creative way and fun way of living in life. It's not like a chore. It really makes it more of this engaged way of being in the world. I think the course is extremely valuable no matter whether someone feels extremely skilled in this kind of work. I think it's still, there's always something to be learned, because the moment we think that we've mastered it, we stop learning, we stop growing, and there's always, I think, room to grow. I would say nonviolent communication and also the class on finances and relationships, those are probably the most valuable for me. And learning how to just be with a human being more on a really authentic, open, sharing level where it's very, very connected. No hiding, no gaming, really one person coming to another from the soul level.
Yes, I am feeling some shifts, more shifts of connection with people, family members. I've noticed myself be a bit more empathic than usual, than my usual stance. So I've done a little bit less of that in the last couple of days. I'm a bit more empathic, more communicating. And also I'm noticing a lot more natural bubbling of joy that's coming forward. Well, I found the course meaningful personally, first of all, in the explanation of how we as humans develop our trauma self and how we act from this trauma self. I found that I have a deeper understanding of how I'm acting and reacting, so I find that tremendously valuable. Another thing that's been clearer is how I am in relationships in terms of codependency, i.e., am I telling the truth and am I backing myself up and holding my own when I'm in relations with people? So that's coming up for heightened awareness. Another thing that's coming up from the course is the understanding that the frustration I was feeling in the past few months is me having a very profound need to express myself in many areas that I haven't been very internal.
The things that I've learned in this course that are already affecting my life are as follows. The value of the relationship, the value of the non-violent communication, honoring myself more and realizing that I don't have to commit a codependent dance with people, that just reaffirming things that I already knew and anchoring in, hopefully, at least the foundation for nonviolent communication, so I don't get into, aggressive arguments with people anymore. And I'd like to do a couple of the courses again, a couple of the sessions again, like relationships and the nonviolent again, and also the self-nurturing. I'd like to do that. I would say whether you've done a lot of work on yourself or whether you've done almost no work on yourself, this is a good point to stop and take a look at how you relate to yourself, how you relate to others, how you walk through your day-to-day life, whether you go with blinders on or whether you have a full 360-degree view. I would say that this is a key mastery to starting that journey and continuing forward so you can be your full potential. I would say that that's a key point. And if you don't want to, no one's going to hold anything up to you and push you. You have to take the first step yourself.
The following are testimonials from 3 women students who completed Jay's 2-class course on what women need to know about men, which is available on this website. Also available are the 2 relationship classes from Jay's Life Mastery Basics course, which are helpful and important complements to the women's course.
I think the class, What Women Need to Know About Men, is an extremely valuable class because, again, we've all had relationships with various partners probably throughout our lives, but this is really an opportunity to assess sort of what our history has been and move forward into more empowering relationships. So I think it really forces us to have immense honesty with our patterns, our unhealed patterns, ones that we've dealt with in others, and what we're willing to commit to. So I think it's really providing a very healthy, solid framework and foundation for moving forward to our ultimate relationship that's really going to grow us into our fullest potential with another human being. So it's great. I love it. Just like nonviolent communication, very, very powerful course.
So I came a little late into the class for what women should know about men. I've had a lot of experience with men, so most of my relationships had traumatized men in them, as well as myself being the traumatized woman. Not being in a relationship now for 4 years has helped me come to the point that taking this class, I really understood what mistakes I've made and kept repeating patterns of picking the same type of traumatized man on different levels. So between different age groups and different nationalities, it didn't matter. It was the same trauma. So I'm hopeful that anyone who takes this, who really wants to get to know themselves and how they relate to men, that they'll learn to see the signs of not communicating, of withdrawing, being passive-aggressive, demanding that the woman do things the woman doesn't want to do necessarily, being very macho. So that was something that this really helped me. Jay is really, really good and very clear in speaking the truth of his experience of counseling many women as well as his past relationships. So I highly recommend this for any woman who wants to really get down to the basics of how to relate not only to themselves, as in the Life Mastery course, but also how to relate to men.
I found this course to be extremely valuable. It allowed me a deeper reflection of my past, how I created life and partnerships, and it allows me to see things differently so that I may move forward with different choices. In the past, I've noticed personally that I left just about every relationship I was in. And mostly it's because I noticed some kind of a pattern, or I didn't know how to be more empowered in what I did want to manifest in the relationship. And so I inevitably would leave it. And after going through this class, I feel confident that I have more tools and skills and understanding and approaching a relationship with, okay, there's patterns for you and there's patterns for me, and that is normal and that is acceptable. So a greater degree of acceptance and probably a greater degree of maturity in saying, I understand this is how it works. This is what's happening for me. This is what's happening for you. Let's figure out what we're doing together and how we move forward given that this is who we are. So I don't need perfection. I think after this course, I need the understanding of, okay, this is doable and we can move forward and I think we can create it. So I find this course invaluable to me personally. I would recommend every woman that has been in and out of relationships to take this course and get a better handle on what we are doing and what is to be accepted and how to go through the difficulties or the things that we're having a problem accepting in the other partner. Really extraordinary insight.
The following are testimonials from 2 men students who completed Jay's 2-class course on what men need to know about women, which is available on this website. Also available are the 2 relationship classes from Jay's Life Mastery Basics course, which are helpful and important complements to the women's course.
Experiencing this class on learning more about women, I'm seeing more of myself as well as I learn more about women, is I have more clarity in the aspect of patterns that I've developed, and I'm very fortunate that I've been working on those already. But this class has outlined other aspects that I hadn't quite focused on as clearly as this makes me do. And it makes me very excited because I'm currently in a relationship that's intimate, but I also consider my friends, my female friends, as family. And that's an intimate relationship to me right there. So this is all important, and I will carry this in through the rest of my days.
So sitting through the What Men Need to Know About Women class was very interesting for me. I've never done anything like this before, therapy or group classes, nothing like this. So it seemed like a lot was coming at me, like I was getting bombarded with all these subconscious things that I was aware of but never actually expressed with other people. I feel like everyone's aware of these things, but to talk about it really brings it out. And I learned a little more about myself, and not being in a relationship right now, I think it gave me a good roadmap for the next one that might come up.